Scary, deep woods stories. The whispering walls of Black Hollow Asylum. In the dense fog of the Pennsylvania woods where cell signals died and the sky always looked 10 shades darker than the forecast claimed, stood a forgotten ruin known only by those who shouldn't know it, Black Hollow Asylum. Long before it became a crumbling skeleton of concrete and rusted iron, it had been one of the largest mental institutions in the northeastern United States. Locals called it the Pit, not because it lay in a valley, but because once you went in, you never really came out. Not all of you, anyway. The place had been abandoned since 1973, when a fire supposedly started in the East Wing. It spread through the building like something alive, eating doors, beds, patients. Officially, 17 died. Unofficially, no one ever got the real count because some said the walls had mouths and they swallowed the rest. Caleb Jennings was not the kind of man who scared easy. At 32, he had worked as a freelance videographer specializing in urban exploration. Abandoned malls, underwater churches, rusted ships half consumed by mangrove swamps. He had seen it all. His online followers loved his no-nonsense, fearless approach. So when a fan sent him coordinates and a chilling message, "You want real horror? Find Black Hollow, but don't go alone. The place chooses who it keeps." Caleb was intrigued. He tried to find any official maps, but Black Hollow wasn't listed. That made it even better. Forbidden places got views, but this time he wasn't going alone. He brought his younger sister Riley, a nursing student with a strange obsession with the supernatural, and Mason, his audio engineer friend who could pick up whispers on tapes even dogs couldn't hear. They left their hotel in a rental SUV before dawn, following a dirt path that turned to rocks, then to roots until the car couldn't go further. From there it was hiking. The air felt off. The forest had a silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like it was holding its breath. Mason's compass spun wildly. Riley kept looking over her shoulder. Caleb tried to keep the mood light, cracking jokes about asylum ghosts needing haircuts. Then they saw it. Black Hollow rose behind the trees like a decaying god. It was massive, 5 stories high, wings stretching out like broken arms. Ivy crawled over it like veins on dying skin. The front doors hung open, not broken but inviting. Inside, their boots echoed on warped tiles. The scent was an unbearable mix of mildew, smoke, and something metallic beneath it. Something that made Riley gag and Mason swear under his breath. They split up. Stupid, of course, but necessary. Riley took the north hallway, her flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. Each room she passed whispered memories. Beds with leather straps, walls etched with fingernail scratches, wheelchairs turned toward corners like someone was still sitting in them. Caleb went for the basement. That's where the fire had supposedly started. His camera light flickered as he moved past collapsed stairs and burnt signage. The temperature dropped fast. In one room he found jars, human teeth inside, neatly labeled. Some still had blood on them. Mason stayed on the second floor, setting up his sensitive audio equipment in what used to be the therapy ward. He joked to himself, "If any ghost wants to talk, now's your chance." But as he turned to adjust the mic, the needle spiked. Static roared in his headphones, and a voice, barely more than a breath, said, "Get out before the dark finds you." He yanked the headphones off. Riley screamed. Her flashlight had gone out. She was sure she had felt fingers brush her neck in the hallway, but when she turned, there was only air. Then faintly down the corridor, a lullaby played. No source, just sound. Caleb, deep in the basement, found what looked like a burnt operating table with restraints. On the wall behind it, something had been burned into the plaster. Still breathing, still watching. His breath fogged. His camera died. Upstairs, Mason called for the others, but the halls had changed. Doors he had marked with chalk were gone. Windows led to brick walls. Time felt fluid. Caleb's voice echoed faintly from the building's intercom system, except he hadn't touched it. It said, "Help me. I can't leave." Riley's phone buzzed, no signal, just one message. "Go to the attic. It's the only way out." None of them had mentioned the attic. They regrouped, somehow, impossibly, at the grand staircase. They hadn't meant to. Their feet had simply brought them there. Riley was pale. Mason was sweating through his shirt. Caleb's hands were shaking. Together, they climbed the stairs toward the attic, each step groaning like the building itself wanted to stop them. The attic door was covered in chains, real rusted chains, as if someone or something had wanted whatever was inside to stay that way. On the door, written in red, or something that looked like red, were the words, "Do not open, she's still hungry." Caleb, of course, opened it. The door groaned open like it was being torn from a mouth that didn't want to let go. The attic was dark, but not the kind of dark that came from lack of light. It was thick, soupy, almost breathing. The three of them stood frozen on the threshold as a gust of air, ice cold and smelling of rot, rushed past them as if something had just escaped. Riley instinctively stepped back, her eyes wide and wet. Mason raised the flashlight, its beam trembling in his hand. The attic was enormous, stretching farther than the layout of the building should have allowed. Crates were stacked like barricades, and in the center sat a rusted hospital bed with leather restraints twisted and torn. Around it, drawn in soot or something darker, were circles filled with symbols none of them could recognize. Caleb, adrenaline masking his fear, stepped forward, camera in hand, sweeping the room. The air inside buzzed like radio static that had been waiting decades to be heard again. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them with a bang that echoed through the rafters like a gunshot. Riley screamed. Mason rushed back to it, but the chains had returned, weaving across the wood like snakes tightening. "It's not letting us out," he whispered. "It was never meant to be opened," Riley added, clutching her cross necklace, her fingers white from the pressure. Then from the far end of the attic came a sound none of them could explain. A dragging like metal scraping across bone, slow and deliberate. The temperature plunged. Their breath fogged in the air. Caleb raised his camera, but the lens fogged over instantly. He wiped it with his sleeve, and that's when he saw her. A figure, thin, pale. No eyes, just gaping sockets that leaked a black liquid like tar. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Only the feeling of dread so thick it made Mason drop to his knees. Caleb stepped backward, the floor groaning beneath him. Riley whispered, "She's the one who whispers, the one they tried to burn." And the woman moved, not walking but gliding, the circles of symbols glowing faintly red as she passed through them. Caleb tried to move, but his feet felt nailed to the floor. She stopped inches from his face. No breath, no heartbeat, only darkness pressing into his chest. Then her mouth moved. "Stay with me," she hissed, though no sound came. It filled their heads like thoughts they didn't want. Suddenly, a gust of unseen force hurled them backward, scattering crates and sending Mason crashing into the far wall. Riley landed near the staircase, bleeding from the forehead. Caleb's camera shattered beside him. The symbols on the floor began to pulse, and from the walls came whispers, hundreds of them, overlapping, crying, begging, screaming. They spoke in tongues none of them understood. Then one voice broke through the chaos, clear and trembling. "She was never buried," Riley gasped. "It's her. They left her up here. They locked her away when the treatments didn't work." Mason crawled toward the nearest crate and pried it open. Inside were old documents, yellowed pages, and brittle film reels. "Patient 113, he read aloud. "No name, no family. Burned in the fire, except she didn't die." Another whisper. "They sealed her soul to the building." "With blood." A loud crack snapped through the air. The bed in the center of the room had levitated and now hovered inches off the ground, the leather straps writhing like snakes. Then the floor beneath it buckled, revealing a pit filled with black, swirling mist. The woman began to rise above it, her body twitching unnaturally, limbs bending the wrong way. Her head snapped toward Riley. "You look like her," she whispered, though again, no sound, just knowledge forced into the mind. Riley backed up, tears streaming down her face. No, I don't know her." But something inside her did. Memories not hers flashed. Images of a nurse screaming, fire licking up the hallway, someone locking the attic door from the outside, the sound of fingernails clawing at the wood. The woman lunged, and Caleb threw himself in front of Riley just as the black mist exploded from the pit, enveloping the room. They couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Mason yelled something, but it was lost in the roar. Caleb felt the cold enter him, like fingers inside his spine. He heard voices from decades ago, doctors laughing, patients crying, the woman screaming, "You will stay, you will stay, you will stay." Then silence. The mist cleared. They were no longer in the attic. The bed was gone. The crates were gone. So was the pit. They stood in a white hallway now, pristine and lit with flickering fluorescent lights. A nurse passed them, not seeing them, her face blank. A man in a straitjacket shuffled by, eyes wide in terror. They were watching echoes, memories embedded in the building itself. Riley whispered, "We're not in the present." Mason clutched his camera, still recording somehow. "This is the asylum before the fire." Caleb tried to move, but he couldn't. Something pulled at him, not physically but mentally, like a hook in his thoughts, dragging him deeper. A doctor stepped into the hallway, looked straight at Caleb, and smiled. "You came back," he said. "You were always hers." Riley screamed again, and suddenly they were back in the attic, lying on the floor. Mason had a bloody nose. Caleb's shirt was torn. Riley was whispering over and over, "We didn't leave. We didn't leave." The attic door creaked, slowly, opening by itself. Beyond it, the hallway was wrong, warped, longer, filled with doors that hadn't been there before. The building was changing, adapting. They didn't know if it was trying to help them escape or trap them further. Mason pointed at the wall. The words had returned. "You are part of it now." Then the sound again, the lullaby, twisted and broken, played backwards, growing louder as the hallway outside darkened. Caleb knew then that Black Hollow wasn't haunted. It was alive, and it had just decided they were never leaving. The walls breathed. It wasn't a metaphor anymore. Caleb could feel them pulsing behind the cracked paint, the rhythmic flex of some vast hidden lung, exhaling the scent of mildew, ash, and something raw. As they stepped out of the attic, the corridor twisted itself into a new shape, longer than before, with archways that hadn't existed minutes earlier and flickering bulbs swinging from frayed wires. Riley clutched Caleb's sleeve, her voice nothing more than a thread of sound. "We're not in the same part of the building. This isn't on the blueprint." Mason glanced back. The attic door was gone, replaced by seamless brick. "It's not letting us retrace our steps," he said, voice hollow. Caleb checked his camera. It still worked. The battery level hadn't dropped since they entered the attic, as if time here obeyed no rules. Ahead, the corridor split into two. From the left came the sound of wet footsteps slapping against tile. From the right, a child's laughter, sweet, high-pitched, and utterly wrong. "Pick one," Mason whispered. They turned right. The laughter led them past rusted wheelchairs, overturned gurneys, and shattered light fixtures. Occasionally, framed photographs of the asylum's early days appeared on the walls, black and white images of doctors and patients. As they passed, the images changed. In one, a smiling doctor blinked, and when they looked again, he was frowning. Blood smeared across his coat. In another, a patient's head turned ever so slightly toward the camera. Riley muttered, "They're watching us through time." They reached a recreation room, or what was left of it. A piano stood in the corner, keys missing, its frame warped. A rocking horse moved slowly in the far corner. The TV, cracked and dark, suddenly blinked to life, displaying nothing but static. Caleb approached it. As he leaned in, a hand burst through the screen, pale and bloated, clawing for his face. He stumbled back, and the screen shattered into black smoke, the hand gone. Riley cried out, pointing to the walls. Writing appeared, scrawled in soot. "You are the story now." Then a voice whispered from the air around them, soft, almost apologetic. "She never wanted to be alone." Mason turned toward a shadow moving just beyond the doorway. They followed it. Each step echoed strangely, repeating not once but thrice, like ghosts following too closely. The hallway curved downward, spiral-like, leading them into what appeared to be the basement, but not the one from the records. This place was ancient, older than the asylum itself, bricks from another era, mortar leaking black sap, and chains embedded in the walls that still dripped blood. "This place was built on something," Mason murmured. "Buried it, maybe, and the asylum was the lid. The air grew heavy. Breathing became effortful. They passed doors bolted shut with words etched into the wood. "Help me! She's inside! Don't open!" One door began to rattle, then another, then all of them. Caleb froze. Behind one door, something screamed, a sound no living throat could produce. Riley pressed her hands to her ears, weeping. "We have to go back. We have to go back." But there was no back, only forward. The corridor ended in a wide stone chamber, circular and silent, the floor marked with ash circles and burned candles. In the center was a chair, and someone was sitting in it. A man, old, skeletal, with skin like parchment and a hospital ID tag hanging from his neck. His eyes were wide open, white and unblinking. He wasn't breathing. Caleb stepped closer and saw that the man was held together by wires, feeding into his arms, mouth, even his eyes, connected to the walls around him. "He's still alive," Caleb whispered. Mason backed away. "He's being used." Then the man spoke. Not with his mouth, but through the walls, the floor, the pipes. "She was never meant to exist." Lights flared around them. Projectors clicked on by themselves, casting images on the stone. Moving images. A girl, 12 years old, strapped to a table, screaming as electricity surged through her body. Nurses watching. A man with a notebook, writing as she begged. "Stop! It hurts!" the girl shrieked. The nurses turned away. The man only smiled. Then came fire. Flames engulfed the frame. Smoke, screams, chaos. The projector melted and the vision ended. Riley was sobbing now, shaking. "They made her. They didn't find her. They made her." A siren blared suddenly, shrill and deep. The room shook. The man in the chair opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Only blood, thick and endless. He collapsed forward, dead at last, and the wires retracted into the walls like veins pulling back to the heart. A hatch opened in the floor. Inside it, stairs. More descent, more dark. "This is the real basement," Mason muttered. "This is where she is." They had no choice. They climbed down. The air changed, no longer cold but hot, oppressive, smelling of sulfur and decay. They entered a space unlike any they'd seen. A room of mirrors, thousands of them, all cracked, all reflecting things that didn't exist in the room. In one mirror, Riley saw herself standing alone, covered in blood. In another, Caleb saw his face twisted into a scream. Mason saw nothing, just black. Then the whispers returned, louder, clearer. "She's hungry. She remembers." The mirrors shattered all at once. They ducked, arms over their heads. Glass rained down like razors, cutting their skin, drawing lines of blood. From the center of the room, a new figure emerged. Not the pale woman from before. This one was younger. A girl. The girl. Her hair matted, her eyes gone, replaced by glowing red hollows. She pointed at Caleb. "You opened the door. You brought me back." The ground split beneath her. Lava-red light pulsed from below. Shadows clawed their way out. Figures with no faces, screaming without mouths. Riley screamed and ran. Caleb followed, Mason close behind. They found a tunnel, narrow and wet, leading upward. As they ran, the shadows chased them, their hands scraping the walls, leaving scorch marks. They reached a sealed door. Mason slammed his body against it. It wouldn't move. Riley turned. The girl was right behind them, floating inches above the ground. She whispered, "I'm already inside." The door exploded outward and they tumbled into a hospital ward, intact, functioning. Nurses bustled. Patients groaned. But no one noticed them. It was the past again. A young nurse passed through Riley like she was missed. "We're caught in the asylum's memory," Caleb gasped. Suddenly alarms blared. Orderlies rushed. "Patient 113 has escaped," someone yelled. "She's heading for the attic." Riley grabbed Mason's arm. "We're inside her memory. We're watching the night it burned." The halls ignited. Flames licked the ceiling. Screams everywhere. The girl ran past them, her face burned, her eyes bleeding. She looked at Riley and whispered, "I remember you." Then silence. They were back in the present. The burned-out ward, ash everywhere. The silence roared, and on the far wall, the words written in blood, "You will never wake up." Caleb collapsed, holding his head. "We're still inside it. She's showing us everything. She wants us to understand her pain." Mason rose, trembling. "Or she wants us to join her." From the shadows came laughter. The girl, the woman, both voices at once. "You came to tell a story," she said. "Now you are one." The lights flickered, and the hallway stretched into darkness. The only way out, deeper into the asylum's forgotten wing. They walked in silence, the crunch of debris underfoot, the only sound in the suffocating dark as the hall narrowed around them like a throat ready to swallow. The whispers never stopped. They seemed to travel through the walls, up from the floors, seeping from the very air itself. A chorus of voices speaking in tongues no human should know, but that the mind still twisted into terrifying meaning. Beg, burn, bleed, remember. Mason led with the flashlight, its beam sputtering more with every step as if the batteries were being drained by the presence in the asylum, or worse, as if something unseen was feeding on the light itself. The corridor finally opened into what appeared to be an old surgical wing, the tiles beneath their feet smeared with blackened streaks of something that was once blood, but had been baked into the floor over decades. Metal tables lay overturned, and rusted saws and scalpels were strewn across the room like forgotten toys. One operating table remained upright in the center, its straps stained, the restraints chewed through from the inside. Riley stepped closer, compelled, and saw that something had been carved into the steel surface. She was a door. Caleb snapped another picture, but the camera's flash illuminated something behind Riley. An outline, faint, shimmering in the air like heat, shaped like a woman, limbs too long, head tilted unnaturally. He lunged, pulling Riley back just as the shape flickered and vanished. "She's following us now," he said. "No, she's already ahead," Mason muttered, pointing to the ceiling. Symbols scorched into the plaster began to glow faintly red, and a soft hum vibrated through the building's bones. Caleb recognized the shape from earlier footage. The same symbol they'd seen burned into the patient files, the one marked 113. The symbol was alive now, pulsing, spreading. The walls cracked outward in response, like ribs breaking open, and suddenly they weren't in the surgical wing anymore. They stood in a chamber with no clear dimensions, the architecture impossibly warped, as if the laws of space had been rewritten by a fevered mind. The floor rippled like water, yet held their weight. In the distance they saw lights, suspended in midair, rotating, each one revealing flashes of a story. A child screaming in a pitch-black room, nurses crying blood, a doctor tearing out his own tongue. "This is the asylum's soul," Riley whispered. "It remembers everything." The lights began to shift, moving faster, spinning into a vortex of imagery so intense it made Caleb collapse to his knees, clutching his head as his mind filled with thoughts that weren't his. Flashes of cruelty, of loss, of agony endured over decades. He saw the girl again. She was in a cage, smaller than a closet, chained by the neck, fed through a hole in the floor. Every day someone came to hurt her. Every night someone came to pray to her. She wasn't a patient anymore. She was a goddess. They had made her into something holy through suffering. And then one night, the cage door opened by itself. Fire followed. The vortex collapsed. The room shattered around them, and the trio was thrown apart. Caleb landed hard, vision spinning. Mason was nearby, struggling to stand, blood dripping from his ears. Riley was missing. Panic surged. They called her name, but the only response was laughter, mocking, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "You took her," Caleb shouted. "Give her back." A doorway appeared in the wall. No door, just an arch into total blackness. Mason stepped toward it without hesitation. "This is what she wants, a game, a descent. We go." Inside the darkness there was no sound but their breath. The walls felt like flesh, wet, twitching, pulsing. Caleb tried not to touch them, but the corridor narrowed, and soon there was no choice but to press forward, shoulder brushing the slick surface. Then, Riley's voice, close, panicked. "I'm here. Please." They turned a corner, and she was there, sitting on the floor, untouched. But her eyes were glazed, her lips trembling. Caleb ran to her, but she recoiled. "You're not real," she said. "She showed me what comes next. We're all dead already." Mason knelt in front of her. "We're real, and we're not done." He held out a hand. Riley hesitated, then took it. The moment she did, the world snapped again. They were back in a patient cell, number 113. The door hung crooked on one hinge, claw marks gouging the inside walls. A journal lay on the cot. Riley picked it up. The pages were written in blood, the words desperate, shaky. "They worship me," the final page read. "But I hate them. I will become their god of rot. I will open their mouths and climb inside. I will walk in their skin." The page burst into flames in Riley's hands. She dropped it, screaming, and the fire spread. Except it didn't burn the room. It burned away reality itself. The walls peeled back, revealing a void of smoke and teeth. Something enormous stirred in the blackness. The shape of a girl and something much older, more ancient, fused together. "She's not just a ghost," Caleb breathed. "She's something else now. A force. A story," Mason said. "And she's using us to write the ending." The entity lunged forward, not physically but mentally, slamming into them with a psychic scream. Memories fractured. Caleb saw his childhood twisted, corrupted. Riley saw her own funeral. Mason saw the asylum still operating, full of screams. They collapsed again, twitching, their minds breaking. Only one thought pulsed through all three of them. Leave. Caleb staggered up. "We can't beat her, but maybe we can contain her. End the story before she finishes writing it." "Burn the tapes," Riley gasped. "Destroy the footage. If no one tells the story, maybe she stays buried." But Mason shook his head. "It's not enough. We have to bury her where she was born. The heart, the origin." The symbols led them, glowing faintly on the walls now, pointing downward. They followed, deeper, through a tunnel not marked on any blueprint, into an ancient chamber that smelled of salt and rot and time. In the center stood an altar of bone, and above it, suspended by chains, was a girl's body, mummified, eyeless, teeth bared in a silent scream. 113th, the original. Caleb approached. "She never left. Just pieces of her escaped. Through stories. Through fear." Riley handed him a lighter. "Burn her." But as he lit the flame, the body opened its mouth and spoke. Not with sound, with thought. "I remember you. You screamed the loudest." The flame flickered. The room shook. Caleb hesitated. Then a hand shot out from the body and grabbed his throat. Cold, strong, filled with centuries of pain. Riley screamed. Mason tackled the altar. The body shrieked, a sound like metal tearing through bone, and the room began to collapse. Stone falling, cymbals cracking. Caleb dropped the lighter. Flames surged, the body burned, and she screamed. The true scream, the final scream. The asylum wailed with her. All around them, the structure began to collapse. Ceiling cracking, walls shattering, smoke pouring in. They ran, through halls that no longer existed, past memories that begged to be remembered, to the exit, to the world. And behind them, Black Hollow Asylum began to fold in on itself like a dying heart. They collapsed outside, coughing, bleeding, shaking. The sun was rising, real sunlight, for the first time in days, or weeks, or years. Riley sat up. "Is it over?" Mason didn't answer. Caleb looked back at the smoking ruins, and in the ash, faint but clear, he saw a message scrawled by something not quite dead. "Tell them about me." He closed his eyes and whispered, "We already did." The morning sun cast long shadows over the ruined facade of Black Hollow Asylum, but the light felt cold and unwelcoming, as if the earth itself tried to keep the horrors hidden beneath its crust. Mason, Caleb, and Riley sat on the cracked pavement, their bodies battered, their minds heavy with the memories of what they had just escaped. Yet despite the physical distance from the asylum, the darkness clung to them like a second skin. Riley shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her thin frame. "I thought it was over," she whispered, her voice trembling. That scream, it wasn't just a scream. It was a promise. Mason glanced at her, his eyes still reflecting the night's terror. You think it can follow us? Caleb's laugh was bitter and hollow. It already has. In the days that followed, the trio returned to their lives. But nothing was the same. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision. Whispers tailed their every step. Dreams became nightmares so vivid they woke screaming in cold sweat, the ghostly girls' hollow eyes burning into their souls. Their phones flickered with static. Strange symbols appeared scrawled on mirrors and walls. Every recording they had made inside the asylum now played back distorted voices, hissing, begging, laughing, voices no human should hear. Caleb tried to convince himself it was all psychological fallout, but deep down, he knew better. The entity, the girl, was no mere ghost. She was a force born from suffering, fear, and vengeance. And now she fed on their fear, growing stronger with every breath they took. One evening, Mason received a message on his phone from an unknown number. The story never ends. Attached was a video, grainy and shaky, showing the asylum's main gate, intact and locked. But the shadows inside seemed alive, twisting, reaching for the camera before it fell silent. Panic spread like wildfire through the group. Riley insisted they find answers, to learn more about the girl, 113, before the darkness consumed them all. Caleb, reluctant but determined, began researching deeper into the asylum's history. What he found was far worse than the stories they'd heard. Black Hollow had been a secretive institution, infamous for inhumane experiments aimed at breaking patients' minds to harness some otherworldly power. The girl, patient 113, was the epicenter of it all, the experiment that went horribly wrong. Records spoke of rituals, dark ceremonies conducted by the asylum's head doctor, a man obsessed with unlocking the boundaries between life and death, between sanity and madness. The staff disappeared one by one, victims of unexplained accidents or madness-induced suicides. But patient 113 remained, trapped between worlds, feeding on pain, becoming something unholy. One night Riley disappeared. The only clue was a message left on Mason's voicemail, a whisper, barely audible, "Come back to finish the story." Caleb and Mason knew the only place she could be was the asylum itself, or what remained of it. They prepared to return, armed with talismans, salt, and anything to fight what awaited them. The air grew thick as they crossed the boundary back into the cursed land where Black Hollow had stood. The ground beneath their feet pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and terrible. The asylum's ruins had transformed overnight, becoming a labyrinth of shifting walls, impossible architecture, corridors folding into themselves like a nightmare made real. The whispers returned, louder, more insistent, promising pain and salvation, demanding sacrifice. As they delved deeper, the world around them dissolved, revealing twisted visions, patients screaming silently, doctors with hollow eyes, the girl's face everywhere, smiling with teeth too sharp to be human. Mason felt the walls close in, suffocating. Caleb clutched a crucifix, whispering prayers. The air shimmered, and suddenly Riley was there, standing on the edge of a dark pit, eyes vacant, lips moving in a language neither man understood. "She's changed," Mason said, fear thick in his voice. "She's the gatekeeper now." The pit opened, swallowing Riley whole. Caleb and Mason hesitated, then leapt after her, falling into darkness deeper than death. They landed in a cavernous space where time twisted, and shadows danced in mocking delight. The girl, no longer a child, but a towering specter, part woman, part nightmare, hovered above a throne of bones. "Welcome back," she said, voice echoing in their minds. "You came to finish the story, but it never ends. It only begins again." The cavern walls pulsed with the cries of forgotten souls, chains rattling in the void. Caleb reached for Riley, but the specter waved a hand, and time fractured, throwing visions of their worst fears into their hearts. Mason saw his family trapped in endless torment. Caleb saw his own face twisted by madness. Riley's mind was a storm of chaos. "You must choose," the specter whispered, "to join me or be lost forever." Desperation fueled their resolve. Mason grabbed a vial of holy water and hurled it at the specter, but it passed through like smoke. The only thing that reacted was the cavern itself, which shuddered violently. Caleb found a knife, its blade carved with ancient runes, glowing faintly with blue light. He lunged, cutting through the specter's form. The scream that followed shattered reality once more. The cavern began to collapse, and the trio ran, the walls closing behind them, the whispers chasing their souls. They emerged back outside, breathless and broken, the sun rising once again over the ruined asylum. But as they looked at each other, the weight of what they had faced was clear. The girl, patient 113, was not defeated. She was merely waiting for the next chapter to be written, and they were forever a part of her story. Mason and Caleb stumbled away from the collapsing ruins of Black Hollow Asylum, their bodies bruised and minds haunted. They carried the weight of Riley's absence, her fate uncertain but etched deeply in their souls. Every night, Mason awoke to the same cold breath on his neck, the echo of hollow laughter lingering in the shadows of his bedroom. Caleb's hands trembled as he held the ancient knife, feeling its pulse like a heartbeat against his palm, a constant reminder that the nightmare was far from over. Determined to find a way to sever the unholy bond tying them to the girl, patient 113, they sought out Dr. Eleanor Graves, a reclusive scholar and former expert on paranormal phenomena who had researched Black Hollow's dark history for decades. Her home was a cluttered maze of dusty books, faded photographs, and occult artifacts, but her eyes shone with a fierce intensity that suggested she had faced the darkness before. The girl, she said softly, is a manifestation of corrupted sorrow and vengeance, a spirit caught between worlds because of the cruel experiments that bound her to this realm. To set her free, you must confront not only her, but the source of her torment, the asylum's heart. Mason frowned. The heart? Yes, Dr. Graves replied. The core of Black Hollow. Beneath the asylum lies a sealed chamber, a place where the doctors perform their darkest rites. It's said to be a gateway, a portal to a realm of shadows where patient 113's soul was torn apart and stitched back together in agony. Destroying that gateway may release her. Caleb clenched the glowing knife tighter. How do we get there? The asylum is gone, but the land remembers. The chamber lies buried beneath the earth, guarded by echoes of the past. You'll need protection. She handed them a small satchel filled with salt, iron shards, and a vial of silvered water. These will help, but your greatest weapon will be your resolve. That night, Mason and Caleb prepared to descend into the earth. They marked their path carefully, retracing the asylum's foundations using old maps and spectral guides whispered from the shadows. The ground beneath their feet trembled as they unearthed a rusted hatch, heavy with the passage of time and dark magic. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something ancient. Fear and sorrow intertwined. With a deep breath, they pried open the hatch and descended into darkness. The chamber below was a cathedral of despair, walls etched with cryptic symbols, iron shackles hanging from the ceiling, and strange devices that whispered of unspeakable horrors. Shadows flickered, coalescing into the tortured forms of lost souls. "Welcome back," a voice hissed, soft, cruel, and impossibly close. The specter of patient 113 appeared, her eyes glowing with rage and pain. "You think you can undo what was done? You will only join us." Mason held up the vial of silvered water, and the specter recoiled, shrieking as it sizzled against her ethereal skin. Caleb followed with the knife, chanting prayers of protection as he slashed at the shadows. The chamber shook violently as the dark magic fought to keep its grip. Desperate, Mason spread salt around the chamber's center, forming a protective circle. Within it lay a cracked obsidian mirror, cracked but still pulsing with malevolent energy. The gateway. "Destroy it," Mason urged Caleb. Caleb drove the knife into the mirror, and a blinding light exploded, engulfing the chamber in searing heat and crushing sound. The tortured souls cried out, and the specter screamed as she was pulled into the collapsing void. The chamber crumbled, and Mason and Caleb barely escaped, bursting through the hatch as the earth sealed itself once more. Outside, the dawn broke, golden and pure. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by a fragile peace. Yet as they looked at each other, both knew the scars of Black Hollow would never truly fade. And somewhere, just beyond the horizon, a faint whisper lingered, a reminder that some stories never truly end. The fragile peace that Mason and Caleb had fought so hard to reclaim quickly began to unravel as the days passed. Though the oppressive darkness that once hung over Black Hollow seemed to have lifted, a new kind of dread settled in their hearts. The whispers that once echoed from the ruins were replaced by a silence that screamed louder than any ghostly wail. Mason's dreams were plagued by visions of the girl, Patient 113, her face twisted with sorrow and rage, reaching out from a void that seemed endless. Caleb found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, feeling the weight of unseen eyes tracking his every move. It was as if the evil that had been chained beneath the earth had simply changed form, waiting patiently for its next chance to consume their souls. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mason received a mysterious package at his doorstep. Inside was an old leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with cramped, frantic handwriting. The journal belonged to Dr. Albert Crane, the asylum's head physician who had orchestrated the terrible experiments decades before. As Mason and Caleb pored over the pages, they uncovered horrifying details about Crane's descent into madness. The doctor had been obsessed with breaking the boundaries between life and death, conducting rituals that summon entities from a realm beyond human understanding. His final entry spoke of a binding ritual intended to trap a powerful spirit within a vessel that was none other than Patient 113 herself. The ritual had gone awry, tearing the girl's soul in two and cursing the asylum forever. More disturbing still was the revelation that the ritual had left fragments of the spirit scattered across the land, hidden in places touched by Crane's madness. These fragments were seeds of darkness, capable of corrupting anyone who came into contact with them. Mason and Caleb realized that their battle was far from over. The asylum might have been destroyed, but its curse had spread, infecting the very soil and air around Black Hollow. Determined to stop the darkness from consuming more innocent lives, they set out to locate and destroy the scattered fragments. Their first lead took them to a long-abandoned farm on the outskirts of town, once owned by a family rumored to have ties to Crane's experiments. The farm was shrouded in an unnatural fog, the air thick with a cold that seemed to seep into their bones. As they explored the decaying buildings, strange symbols etched into the wooden beams seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the barn, carrying with it whispers of agony and despair. The ground beneath their feet trembled as shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, tormented spirits bound to the fragments of the cursed ritual. Mason and Caleb fought desperately, using the talismans and silvered water Dr. Graves had given them, but the spirits were relentless. Just as they were about to be overwhelmed, a brilliant light burst forth from the journal, illuminating the farm with a radiant glow. The fragments screamed in fury as the light consumed them, freeing the trapped souls and restoring a fleeting sense of peace to the forsaken land. Exhausted but resolute, Mason and Caleb knew this was only the beginning. The fragments were many, scattered across the country, each one a beacon for darkness. Their journey would take them to the darkest corners of America, places haunted by secrets and shadows. And through it all, the memory of Patient 113, the girl who had become a symbol of suffering and vengeance, would guide them. As they left the farm behind, the first rays of dawn pierced the fog, casting a hopeful light on their path forward. But deep in the shadows, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the next move in a game that had only just begun. Mason and Caleb's journey led them further from Black Hollow, deeper into the heart of a darkness that seemed to stretch across the American landscape like a web of despair. Their next destination was the desolate town of Raven's Peak, a place shrouded in legends and whispered warnings. The locals spoke of disappearances, strange lights in the sky, and shadows that moved against the wind. The town's abandoned church, a crumbling Gothic structure perched on a hill, was said to be the resting place of one of the cursed fragments. As they approached Raven's Peak, a heavy silence fell, broken only by the distant howl of a lone wolf. The air was thick with tension, and Mason felt the familiar cold touch of unseen eyes following their every step. Inside the church, the atmosphere was suffocating. The pews were rotted and broken, the stained glass windows shattered, and a thick layer of dust coated the altar. But it was the pulpit that drew their attention, engraved with the same cryptic symbols found in the Black Hollow chamber and on the farm. Suddenly, a low chant echoed through the nave, chilling them to the bone. From the shadows emerged a figure draped in tattered robes, face hidden beneath a hood. "You seek the fragments," the figure hissed, voice like dry leaves scraping stone. "But the darkness does not yield so easily." Mason stepped forward, clutching the silvered water. "We're here to end the curse." The figure laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the ruined sanctuary. "The curse is eternal. It is the blood that feeds this land. You cannot destroy what is already part of you." With a wave of their hand, shadows erupted from the walls, coiling and twisting like serpents. Mason and Caleb braced themselves as the darkness lunged. The battle was brutal. The shadows clawed and bit, whispering twisted promises and ancient lies. Caleb's knife flashed in the dim light, slicing through the tendrils of shadow, while Mason threw the silvered water, which hissed and burned the darkness wherever it touched. Amid the chaos, the robed figure chanted louder, summoning a vortex of black energy above the altar. The ground shook as the vortex pulsed, threatening to tear the world apart. Mason realized that the fragment was hidden within that vortex. With a cry, he lunged forward, plunging the knife into the swirling mass. The vortex exploded in a blinding flash, and the robed figure screamed as their form dissolved into nothingness. The church trembled as the shadows were ripped away, the heavy silence replaced by an eerie calm. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over Raven's Peak, casting long shadows that retreated into the corners. Mason and Caleb emerged from the church, battered but victorious. Yet as they looked toward the horizon, they knew the darkness was not vanquished. It only waited for the next opening. The fragments were many, and each one was a thread in a tapestry woven from suffering and evil. Their quest was far from over. With heavy hearts and weary bodies, they pressed on, knowing that the fate of many rested on their shoulders. The land was haunted, but so were they, bound by a promise to face the shadows no matter where they led. And somewhere, in the distance, a faint melody drifted on the wind, a lullaby twisted by pain and loss, the song of patient 113, calling them onward into the night. Mason and Caleb's journey took them next to the forgotten mining town of Dagger's Edge, nestled deep within the jagged mountains of Colorado. The town was once a bustling hub for miners, but after a series of tragic accidents and unexplained disappearances, it had been abandoned and left to rot in silence. Stories told of a sinister presence lurking beneath the mines, a darkness born from greed and blood spilled in the earth. As Mason and Caleb approached the rusted gates of Dagger's Edge, the wind howled through the skeletal remains of the old buildings, carrying with it a sense of warning. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as if the earth itself was trembling in fear. They made their way into the mine's entrance, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Their footsteps echoed in the vast tunnels, the silence broken only by the distant drip of water. Mason's flashlight revealed jagged walls scarred by rusted tools and faded graffiti, but it was the strange symbols carved deep into the rock that caught their attention. Symbols identical to those linked to the cursed fragments. As they ventured deeper, the temperature dropped sharply, and an unnatural stillness settled over the tunnel. Shadows twisted and danced at the edges of their vision, and strange whispers seemed to seep from the very stones. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath Caleb, and he plunged into a dark chasm. Mason's heart pounded as he scrambled down to help, finding Caleb trapped in a tangle of old mining carts and broken rails. As Mason freed him, a deep rumbling echoed through the tunnels, and the walls began to close in. They realized the mine was collapsing, an ancient curse reawakened to trap intruders forever. Desperately, they ran toward the exit, but the path was blocked by a towering figure made of shadows and rusted metal. It was the spirit of a miner, twisted by the darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "Leave this place," it growled, voice like grinding stone, "or join us in the depths." Mason raised the silvered water, and the spirit recoiled. Caleb slashed with his knife, but the creature's form shifted and reformed like smoke. They were fighting not just a ghost, but the embodiment of the mind's cursed history, greed, death, and despair fused into a single vengeful entity. The battle was desperate and brutal. Mason and Caleb's strength waned, but they refused to give in. As the creature lunged, Mason threw the vial of silvered water into its chest. The spirit screamed as the liquid burned through its shadowy form, unraveling the curse's hold. With a final roar, the creature dissolved into dust, and the tunnels stilled. The ground beneath them stopped shaking, and a faint light appeared ahead, an exit to the outside world. As they emerged into the fresh air, Mason and Caleb felt the weight of the fragment lifting. But their victory was bittersweet. The curse of Dagger's Edge was just one thread in the dark tapestry they sought to unravel. The fragments still lingered, scattered and waiting, each one a challenge that would test their courage and sanity. With resolve hardened by hardship and loss, they pressed on, knowing that every step forward brought them closer to the heart of the darkness. And somewhere, far away, the mournful lullaby of Patient 113 echoed once more, a haunting melody guiding them deeper into the night. The road ahead twisted and turned as Mason and Caleb left the haunted ruins of Dagger's Edge behind, their minds heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. Their next destination was an ancient plantation deep in the swamps of Louisiana, a place known as Ravenwood Manor. Once a grand estate, it had fallen into decay, overrun by moss and shadow, surrounded by murky waters and the cries of unseen creatures. The locals told tales of restless spirits bound to the land, victims of a dark history stained with betrayal, murder, and voodoo curses. As the two men crossed the rickety bridge leading to the manor, a thick fog rolled in, swallowing the path behind them. The heavy silence was punctuated by the distant croak of frogs and the rustle of unseen animals. Mason's heart pounded as he glanced up at the mansion's looming silhouette against the darkening sky, its windows like empty eyes watching their every move. Inside, the air was thick with decay and something far darker, an oppressive energy that seemed to pulse through the rotting wood and cracked walls. The floorboards groaned beneath their feet as they explored the grand hall, its once opulent decorations now warped and faded. At the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface cloudy and swirling with shadows. As Mason approached, he caught a glimpse of a figure behind him, a woman dressed in a tattered gown, her face pale and eyes hollow. Spinning around, he found the room empty, but the chill in the air deepened. Caleb's voice broke the silence, his tone grim. "This place is alive with pain. The fragment must be here." They moved cautiously through the manor, uncovering hidden rooms and peeling back layers of history filled with dark rituals and whispered secrets. In the basement, they discovered a hidden chamber adorned with voodoo dolls, bones, and ancient symbols. A faded journal revealed the story of Madame Laveau, a powerful practitioner who had made a pact with dark spirits to protect the estate, but was betrayed and murdered by those she trusted. Her curse had seeped into the land, binding souls and shadows to Ravenwood Manor. As they attempted to destroy the fragment hidden beneath the manor's floorboards, a sudden storm erupted outside, lightning illuminating the twisted vines creeping over the walls. The spirits awakened, swirling in a vortex of fury and sorrow. Shadows lunged, voices screamed, and the air crackled with supernatural energy. Mason and Caleb fought desperately, chanting incantations and wielding their talismans, but the darkness was relentless. In a final act of defiance, Mason shattered the mirror, unleashing a burst of blinding light that banished the spirits and shattered the curse's hold. Exhausted and wounded, the men emerged from the manor as the storm cleared, the swamp once again silent but forever marked by the darkness they had faced. The fragments were fewer now, but each victory came at a cost. The toll on their minds and bodies was growing heavier with every step. Yet they pressed on, driven by a promise to end the curse and honor the memory of Patient 113. As the sun rose over the swamp, a faint melody drifted on the wind, a haunting lullaby calling them onward, deeper into the night's embrace. Mason and Caleb left the suffocating swamps of Ravenwood Manor behind, but the haunting melody of Patient 113 lingered in their minds like a persistent shadow. Their journey now took them north to the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, to a place called Silent Pines. It was a town that seemed frozen in time, surrounded by towering evergreens and blanketed by a thick mist that rarely lifted. The townsfolk were few and tight-lipped, their eyes darting nervously as if they feared that even speaking aloud might summon something dreadful. The fragment they sought was rumored to be hidden in the abandoned logging camp on the outskirts of town, a place where countless workers had vanished without a trace during a brutal winter decades ago. Mason and Caleb arrived as twilight descended, the forest swallowing the fading light. The path to the logging camp was overgrown and treacherous, roots and fallen branches threatening to trip them at every step. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of pine and decay. As they pushed forward, a low, mournful whistle drifted through the trees, a sound that seemed both human and otherworldly. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the forest itself was watching, waiting. At the camp, the cabins were mere skeletons, their wooden frames blackened by fire and time. The ground was littered with broken tools and forgotten possessions, frozen in the moment of their owner's disappearance. Mason's flashlight caught a glint beneath a collapsed cabin floorboard, a fragment of obsidian etched with the same cryptic symbols they had encountered before. As Mason reached for it, a sudden scream pierced the night, chilling and desperate. Shadows erupted from the surrounding trees, swirling and converging into twisted figures of lost lumberjacks, their faces twisted with pain and rage. The forest seemed alive with their anguish, the spirits bound by a terrible curse. The battle was fierce, the men fighting not just for the fragment, but for their very souls. Caleb's blade struck true, slicing through the spectral forms, while Mason's talisman glowed, repelling the darkness. But the spirits were relentless, fueled by decades of suffering and betrayal. As they cornered Mason, a voice whispered in his ear, a chilling promise of doom if they failed. Summoning every ounce of strength, Mason crushed the obsidian fragment beneath his boot. The spirits screamed as the curse shattered, their forms dissolving into mist. The forest fell silent once more, the mist lifting to reveal a sky studded with stars. Mason and Caleb collapsed, exhausted but victorious. Yet the path ahead was clear. The fragments were nearly all accounted for, but the final confrontation awaited them in a place darker than any they had yet faced. With the lullaby of Patient 113 echoing faintly on the wind, they prepared to face the ultimate shadow lurking in the heart of the night. Mason and Caleb stood at the edge of the forgotten town of Black Hollow, a place whispered about only in the darkest tales, hidden deep in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. Black Hollow was a place where time seemed to warp, where reality bent and twisted beneath a shroud of ancient evil. The final fragment was said to lie beneath the abandoned church at the town's center, a relic that held the source of the curse that had plagued Patient 113 and haunted their journey. The air was thick with a sense of dread as they entered Black Hollow. The town's empty streets lined with crumbling buildings, their windows like black holes staring into their souls. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant howling of wolves and the faint, eerie lullaby that had become their haunting companion. As they approached the church, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and shadows shifted unnaturally at the edge of their vision. Inside, the church was a cavernous tomb, its pews rotted and covered in dust, its altar cracked and stained with unidentifiable dark marks. The fragment pulsed with a sickly glow beneath the altar stone, emanating a cold, malevolent energy that filled the room with despair. As Mason reached for it, the darkness coalesced into a towering figure cloaked in black robes, its face hidden beneath a hood, eyes burning with an unnatural fire. It was the embodiment of the curse itself, the source of the nightmare that had claimed countless souls. The entity spoke without words, its voice a dreadful chorus echoing in their minds, promising eternal torment should they attempt to take the fragment. Mason and Caleb steeled themselves, knowing that this battle would decide the fate of not just their own souls, but the countless victims bound to the curse. The fight was unlike anything they had faced before. Shadows clashed with light, wills pitted against the relentless darkness. Time warped around them, moments stretched and snapped as they fought for survival. Mason's talisman glowed brighter than ever, and Caleb's blades sang through the air. But the entity's power was vast, fueled by centuries of hatred and sorrow. Just as hope seemed lost, Mason remembered the lullaby, a melody of healing and release. He began to hum it, soft at first, then louder, its pure notes piercing the darkness like a beacon. Caleb joined in, their voices merging, filling the church with the song's light. The entity shrieked, its form unraveling as the curse's hold weakened. With a final surge, Mason grasped the fragment and crushed it, releasing a wave of light that banished the darkness and freed the trapped souls. The church trembled one last time before falling silent, the oppressive weight lifting like a fading nightmare. Outside, dawn broke over Black Hollow, bathing the town in warm light for the first time in centuries. Mason and Caleb stood together, exhausted but victorious, their journey complete. The haunting lullaby faded into the morning breeze. No longer a call to darkness, but a song of peace. The curse was broken, patient 113 finally free. But the memory of the shadows would linger, a reminder of the night they faced the darkness and emerged into the light.